Okay, so recently I released a video where I combined 3 copies of the Blue Eyes White Destiny structure deck, and while I was building the deck list for that video, it occurred to me that most of the cards that you need to run this deck already has multiple copies of it. So I thought, what would happen if we only got 2 copies of Blue Eyes White Destiny and combined those into one powerful deck? How far could we go? And the answer is very far. This is almost like just as good as the 3 copies of the structure deck. It is seriously, like, it's a good Blue Eyes deck when all you have is the structure deck. So today I present to you the $20 Blue Eyes deck. Let's get into it. Okay, so to start off, this is very similar to my 3 copy structure deck, so I would highly recommend watching that as well, just if you want more info on the card choices, but also recommend watching my how to play video and my combo video. Check the card above for details on those. But essentially what we've got here is a basic Blue Eyes deck. I run 3 copies of Blue Eyes White Dragon. This deck already has 3 copies, so you only need 1 for that. The reason I run 3 instead of 2 is just because I find it allows us to further extend our plays and give us more options for going into Blue Eyes Tyrant Dragon. It's not necessary, but it's fun. If you run into bricks, then take out 1. That rhymed. I didn't mean to do that. This was not planned, but I like it. 2 copies of Nibiru, of course. Wish we could have 3, but the deck only comes with 1. 1 copy of Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon. This isn't a fantastic card, but it is just, you know, we need to add cards, and this is one of the good choices. It allows us to have an easy level 8 that we can go into to just further extend our plays or help us go into our Synchro monsters and our Xyz monster. Blue Eyes Jet Dragon, Dragon Spirit of White are both really good cards to go into off of the effect of Heretic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres, so I do like to include these just for that effect. I like to have both of them to have the option, but 1 is fine, but again, we're only running 2 copies of the deck, so gotta fill it up somehow. 2 copies of Neo Kaiser Seahorse. We only get 1 copy per deck, so we just have to go with 2. This is a good starter, and it is better than Dictator of D, but we get 2 copies of Dictator per structure deck, so we've got 3 copies of Dictator of D. Of course, as many copies of Ash Blossom as we can have, which is 2. If you have a third, I recommend putting 1 in. 1 copy of Master with Eyes of Blue. This is good for the Blue Eyes combos. One of our combos allows us to use Master with Eyes of Blue, and it just helps us extend and is another level 1 light tuner that we can go into. 3 copies of Effect Veiler. Here is where stuff really starts getting good, because this deck has multiple copies of all the good stuff. So 3 copies of Effect Veiler, perfect, just what we need. 3 copies of Maiden of White. Now this is a little random. Each of these decks comes with 1 copy of Maiden, but I was told in the comments that the extra card that you get, in my case, was Maiden of White, but the extra card you get can either be Maiden of White, Wishes for Eyes of Blue, or Blue Eyes Ultimate Spirit Dragon. So this deck currently assumes that you get lucky and get a Maiden of White and a copy of Wishes as your extra card. In the case that you didn't get both of those, I have an option for that later on. But in an ideal situation, 3 copies of Maiden of White, if not 2, is fantastic. 3 copies of Sage with Eyes of Blue. Of course, this is the main starter of the deck, and the deck already comes with 3 copies of him. It comes with 3 copies, right? It comes with 3 copies of him. That's all you need, really? Fantastic. 3 copies of him. 1 copy of Burst Stream of Destruction. Just since we don't have better options, this card can be searched with Mausoleum of White and is just a good board wipe that we can have with the deck. 2 copies of Roar of the Blue-Eyed Dragons. Again, we can only have 2. Great card, good starter, but like not the main starter of the deck. 3 copies of Wishes for Eyes of Blue. Same situation with Maiden, you have to get lucky to get that 3rd copy. But, you know, if you can, 3 copies is great, otherwise 2 works as well. But this is one of the main starters of the deck and is a great card to have at 3. Finally, just to wrap up the deck, we have 1 copy of Called by the Grave, of course, 1 copy of Ultimate Fusion. Again, we have the space and it's just a fun card to have in the deck. 1 copy of Mausoleum of White goes with our main combo, but we only need 1. 1 copy of Destined Rivals, 2 copies of Infinite Impermanence, 1 Majesty with Dragons of White, 1 Ultimate Creature of Destruction, and of course 1 copy of the much needed True Light. So there's a few more traps in this deck than you would normally like to see, but they are just the best options, I think. I think they're the best options that you can include when you're only running 2 of the deck. Ideally, I would rather have 3 Roar of the Blue-Eyed Dragons, 3 Neo Kaiser Seahorse, and of course 3 of both of our hand traps, but since we only have 2 of them because they only come with 1 each, this is just what we have to settle for, and we have to settle for more traps. But all of these traps are really good cards to have, and you'll never be sad when you draw into them or just play into them through your normal plays. All of our main starters, being Maiden, Sage, and Wishes, you have 3 copies of with only 2 copies of this deck. You do have to get lucky, but again, I'll talk about what happens if you don't get lucky, some other options you can explore with this deck. But ultimately, this deck runs pretty much exactly the same as the 3 copies deck, and our extra deck is exactly the same, since you only need at most 2 copies of any of these cards, so that runs perfectly fine by itself. The only difference in this extra deck is that we have 2 copies of Tyrant Dragon instead of 3 copies of Spirit, but having 2 copies of Tyrant Dragon just allows us to go into more Tyrant Dragon, I guess. You could instead have 2 copies of Indigo or Azure Eyes, but I just think that 2 copies of Tyrant Dragon works out best and is more likely that you're going to go into multiple copies of that instead of the others. The only real difference between this deck and the 3 copies deck is just that this deck has a little bit more bricks in the form of alternative, but just instead of being hyper consistent, it has just a few more options, which are still pretty much just as good as the 3 copies deck. I don't think there's much disparity between the 2 versions of the deck. I would say that the 3 copies is slightly better, it's more consistent, but this deck works pretty much equally as well. Now, if you don't get lucky and don't have 3 Maidens and 3 Wishes, then a good option for this deck is instead Melody of Awakening Dragon. 1 or 2 of these, depending on how many cards you're missing. This card is a 1-card alternative dragon, so it does work very well, particularly with this version of the deck. What you do is use this, discard a card, add a Blue Eyes and a Blue Eyes alternative, which will then allow you to reveal the Blue Eyes to special summon the alternative, giving you a 3 level 8. If you find that you're drawing into your level 8s fairly often, then Trade-In is also another really good option. The only reason I didn't put Trade-In in is because I find that there's not enough level 8s that you draw into them frequently enough, and you have to draw both a level 8 and Trade-In at the same time, making it a little less consistent than the other options that we have here. Granted, for going into alternative, you do also need to have a Blue Eyes White Dragon, but I'd rather have a free level 8 than discarding a level 8 to draw 2 cards, when in most situations we already have everything we need anyway, simply because we have 3 copies of Maiden, 3 copies of Wishes, 3 copies of Sage, and all of those are 1-card combos. The consistency with this deck, the sheer amount of 1-card combos that this deck comes with, means that we don't really need to draw a lot of cards, which is the only reason I didn't run Trade-In. But that's me. For you, you might find that you run into a lot of breaks, you keep drawing your level 8s, in which case you may want to put in a Trade-In instead of one of the cards that we have here, like your level 8s, or if you get unlucky and don't have 3 copies of the 2 cards, then you could put in a couple Trade-Ins instead. So, as we can see, you only need $20, you only need 2 copies of this deck to make a fairly consistent and very good Blue Eyes deck, which I think makes Blue Eyes White Destiny the best structure deck that we have ever had, I think. I'm pretty sure every other structure deck to ever have been released needs 3 copies of the deck, so the fact that this only needs 2, and in some cases even only needs 1, since it already comes with 3 copies of Sage, it's just fantastic. It's a great deck, definitely worth it. If you can get just 1 copy and then buy the extra cards that you don't have, like Wishes and Maiden, then it's even cheaper than $20. So that is all for today's video. Just something I wanted to share with you guys, just a little bit extra budget on the Blue Eyes deck. If you want to upgrade your Blue Eyes White Destiny structure deck even further, then click the card above or wait till the end card to see my previous video on the best cards to add to upgrade your Blue Eyes deck. But without further ado, thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know what you think about this deck list in the comments below. Let me know any changes you would make or any decks that you have made, or just any luck that you've had winning with this version of the deck. Thank you all so very much for watching. My name has been Senkara, and until next time, see ya.